As the 1960s began, Count Basie had established himself on the international circuit. His band still made much of its living from incessant touring, but he was well beyond the kind of financial crisis that had forced him to break up the orchestra a decade earlier. His band also became the automatic choice to accompany virtually every major jazz singer, more often than not with Basie himself handing over the piano stool to the singer's regular accompanist. For example, he doesn't even appear on this famous album from 1960 when his own vocalist, Joe Williams, teamed up with Sarah Vaughan.
Just ask me how do I feel, ask me now that we're cozy and clinging. Well, Sarah, all I can say is if I were a bell, I'd be ringing.
From the moment we kissed tonight, that's the way I've just gotta behave. Boy, if I were a lamp, I'd light, or if I were a banner, I'd wave.
Ask me how do I feel, little me, with my quiet upbringing. Well, sir, all I can say is if I were a gate, I'd be a swaying.
And if I were a watch, I'd start popping my string. Or if I were a bell, I'd go ding-dong, ding-dong, ding.
If I Were a Bell, arranged by Thad Jones and sung by Sarah Vaughan and Joe Williams with the Basie Band, although Kirk Stewart was temporarily occupying the piano chair. Well, more in a moment about some of the other major stars who appeared with Basie, but I shouldn't overlook the fact the band itself was packed with talent. That 1960 lineup alone was awash with great soloists. Thad Jones, Joe Newman and Sunny Payne in the trumpets, Al Gray, Henry Coker and Benny Powell in the trombones, and in the reeds the two Franks, Foster and Wes, plus Billy Mitchell and Marshall Royal. But on the drums there was the flamboyant figure of Sunny Payne. The man who had the unenviable task of taking over from Payne, Butch Miles, told me just how significant a figure Sunny was.
Sunny Payne was, first of all, he was a fine drummer. He was an excellent drummer, but second of all, he was a magnificent showman. He really put on a performance on stage that just gave an audience a wonderful time. He was having a wonderful time, as well as performing right off the edge. I mean, he would chew up the scenery, as you say about actors sometimes. He really would chew up the scenery. Sticks would be flying in the air. He'd be bouncing them off the drums, catching them behind his back. There'd be maybe a magnificent passage where the band is screaming, then they stop short for a 2-bar break pickup for a horn instrumentalist to go into a solo, and Sonny might throw both his sticks in the air, catch them just as they came in on the downbeat. Now, a few times he might miss them, which was more part of the fun, too. But Sonny was a very extroverted individual, and a little bit of that rubbed off on me.
Butch Miles. And the man who leads the band today, Grover Mitchell, agrees, especially as he sees Sunny Payne as part of the great tradition of Basie percussionists, going back to the band's very first drummer.
Joe Jones was the one. Joe invented modern drumming. You know, he didn't play with that old stomp, 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 4-beat bass drum. You know, he was really slick as a greased snake, you know. But, you know, he had all kinds of emotional and mental problems and everything like that. So by the time we went through a few drummers and you got to Sunny Payne, and then all of a sudden you had that excitement back, you know, plus that ability to play in the rhythm section. And Gus Johnson was good. Was a good drummer for this band, but Gus wasn't a soloist. He had great time and he played good fills and everything, but he didn't play solos at all. And so Sunny Payne actually replaced Gus Johnson.
Sunny Payne, showing that you can be just as flamboyant with brushes as sticks on Neil Hefti's composition Cute. Sunny came back to join the band more than once, and it was a measure of the band's stature amongst musicians, in the 60s and 70s particularly, that many other former members came back to rejoin the lineup from time to time, as baritone player John Williams recalls.
He had Sunny Payne on drums, who incidentally came back in the 70s for 2 years, so I got a chance to play with him for 2 years. And then he had Eddie Jones on bass and Freddie Green in the rhythm section. And he had Joe Newman, Pete Minger, Lynn Biviano, and John Faddis in the trumpet sections. And Benny Powell, Mel Wanzo, Bill Hughes, and Frank Hooks were in the trombones. And then in the saxes he had Bobby Plater, Eric Dixon, who was away from the band just for a moment and was back for that job, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, Curtis Pegler, and me. So those were great thrills to have men like Frank West and Frank Foster come back and play with us and maybe work with us for 3 weeks at a time.
Part of The Magic Flea by one of Basie's most prolific arrangers, Sammy Nestico, featuring Eddie Lockjaw Davis on tenor at the Antibes Festival in France in 1968. Lockjaw Davis was just one of the roster of impressive soloists, but what brought the band to the attention of a public that went well beyond jazz enthusiasts was its work with star singers, from Frank Sinatra to Tony Bennett.
I was the first white singer to ever sing with a black band, and in those days it was a shocker. It wasn't supposed to happen, you know. And it was a great experience. We became great friends, and he was the funniest and most wonderful human being. I had so much fun with Basie. I mean, he could go to a little town in the United States like Minneapolis. That night, that town became New York City. That's the only way I could explain it. This wide, big sound, you know, it just, bam, just hit everybody right in the solar plexus, you know. They couldn't believe what was happening in their town. Same thing happened in Britain. We played all over Britain with the Basie band, and it was a tremendous experience. Every night was something else.